we ran a field experiment on Twitter where we created a bunch of like cooking bots. So just like generic random bots. And we followed like many people with these bots. And then some people follow you back when you follow them on social media. And so the people who followed us back, that allowed us to send them a direct message, slid into their DMs, as the kids would say, with a question, how accurate is this headline? And then everyone ignored it because it's a weird message to get from a cooking bot. But still, because we asked about accuracy, the first sentence was about accuracy, the quality of the news content they shared on Twitter in the 24 hours that followed was improved. More stuff from the New York Times, less stuff from Breitbart.
Welcome to Research Matters, a podcast from Cornell University where we talk with researchers who are tackling real-world problems and finding surprising ways to fix them. I'm your host, Laura Riley, and today's episode is one I've been looking forward to, the science of human stupidity. Now I know what you're thinking, guide from my boss, my cousin on Facebook, the guy who's constantly sending me those conspiracy memes. But it isn't about calling people dumb. It's about understanding why all of us, smart people included, sometimes believe and do stupid things. My guest today is Dr. Gordon Pennycook, professor of psychology at Cornell University. His work explores why our brains fall for misinformation, how overconfidence warps our thinking, and how better reasoning might just save us from ourselves. Gordon, welcome to Research Matters.
Thanks for having me.
So I guess let's start. So why do smart people believe dumb things?
In many ways, the way that our brains evolved made us not very attuned to the modern context that we happen to inhabit. Really good at drawing out and paying attention to like things in specific kind of contexts. Once there's a lot of stuff going on, it's pretty easy to get distracted.
We were better when we were hunter-gatherers.
Maybe.
And
I
now...
think we were maybe more tuned to that context. I think the other thing is that we are very good at making snap decisions and thinking quickly. We did evolve a capacity to stop and to reflect, but it's something that we kind of save for particular contexts. The modern context is one where we need it more, but we haven't caught up yet, basically.
So one of the things you said to me in an email that I found interesting was motivated reasoning is overrated as a concept. I'd love for you to just unpack what you mean by that.
Right. So like my general take is that the biggest kind of problem, the reason that we make so many mistakes, is we don't spend enough time thinking about things, basically. We rely too much on our gut feelings and our intuitions. Motivated reasoning is this idea that people are thinking too much, that they're spending time convincing themselves that the things that they want to believe are true. And I don't really think that we spend that much time doing that. I think we don't spend enough time thinking. And one of the reasons why this idea of motivated reasoning is so popular is because it helps use the language of partisan animosity to explain why people disagree. You say, the person over there who believes something differently than me, they don't even care about the truth. And they're just deluding themselves into believing these things, that it's because it's so hard for you to understand that someone would actually believe something that's different than you, when in reality they probably are just getting different information than you are. Their intuitions are different than yours are. They've been raised by different people, and so they have different views on what seems true to them. And it's less about kind of self-delusion, and it's more about lazy thinking.
So I think one of the papers that certainly got a lot of traction for you and that you're known for is, I guess we can say that here, is the psychology of bullshit. And the kind of word salad experiment of giving people an array of buzzy words, and intuitive people saw profundity. So here's an example that he gave of like a buzzy word salad. Hidden meaning transforms unparalleled abstract beauty. So lovely bunch of words, but you hand that to someone and they see profundity, not word salad. And why is that?
Yeah, so it's a great example of how when something feels intuitively right to us. So what we did is and by the way, bullshit is a technical word. It's from Harry Frankfurt's an excellent essay called On Bullshit. And it's about.
So how is it a technical word?
Well, so bullshit is different from lying, right? So if you lie, that means, or it implies that you care about the truth. You care enough about the truth to try to subvert it or to convince someone else to believe something else. Bullshitting is basically defined as something constructed without regard for the truth. You don't.
So is it like disinformation versus misinformation, kind of?
Sort of. There's a similar, yes, because a disinformation is you're deliberately trying to convince someone that something is false that isn't, or at least by your own perception. Misinformation is just something that's false. Bullshit's a little bit different. It can be misinformation, but it cannot be. It doesn't have to be false. It just means that you don't care about the truth when you've made it, and so it could be very common for advertising. Or in that case, the word salad, it's not false. There's no meaning. It's just a random sentence with buzzwords. And so even though it's a random sentence, people find profundity in it. And when I say find, I don't mean that they're searching for it and they're thinking about it. It just seems profound because they haven't thought about it.
Because it's fancy words.
It's fancy words.
So why do you say like more intuitive people kind of reach for that quicker? Or are you saying that?
That's what I'm saying. And that is people who are more deliberate and analytical, they're like, they have the first impression that's pretty similar where like that sounds kind of interesting, maybe profound. But then you think about it and you're like, I don't know what it means. And you stop and you're like, well, it's not actually profound. And so that makes you more discerning. And
it's very Hallmark card.
Yeah, exactly. And so there's it's actually the most important thing is not just necessarily rejecting things, but being able to distinguish between what is and what is not BS. And the people who are more intuitive because they're kind of accepting things in a more kind of automatic way, they're less discerning.
So is that why certain politicians, it takes parsing it after the fact for us to recognize there's no actual content? Or
I think it's a thing that happens in politics. Another thing that happens in politics is you get platitudes. So it's not like this is abstract jargon. It's hard to know exactly what it means. A platitude is like something that seems profound because it's so simple. But then when you think about it, there's not a lot has been communicated. It's sort of
the Peter Sellers being there
exactly.
kind of effect.
Exactly.
Yeah. So you've written about this thinking in a distracted world. I think we should kind of do a little bit on that. And I think that's something you've written about quite a bit. And I do think it kind of sums up the moment that we're in. More information, more distractions, the thing in our hand all the time. Mm-hmm. How do you unpack that in terms of what your research has found?
Right. So, I mean, if we go back to the kind of primary point I was making about how we essentially rely too much on our gut feelings and our intuitions, add that into a context that is now basically selecting on information that appeals to our feelings and our intuitions, and in ways in which, like, there's some cases where that's not that big of a deal. You want, if you're decorating your house, you want to kind of catch your eye in certain sort of ways that, is appealing or whatever, and there's no like consequence for that. In the context of social media, when it's news that's made up or outrageous videos of political others that make you angry, these are the things that will take our underlying psychology and basically weaponize it against us. And the only way to kind of get around that is you have to slow down. You have to stop and you have to actually think about the things that you're engaging with, and ideally modify it so that the feed doesn't require so much work to parse through. You have to make better decisions about what you're engaging with.
So modify how? Like give us a tool. Like what's a modification we can make?
So if you are on social media and you're following somebody who is taking advantage of outrage and fear and anger,
unfollow.
Get rid of that. Just you don't have to follow that person.
Yeah. You have to have the I don't know, clear-mindedness,
wherewithal,
the wherewithal to recognize that they're a polemicist or that they're,
Or even more than that is like have a pretty low bar, low tolerance for people who are misleading you and making mistakes. Whereas there are a lot of great journalists and sources of information. That's the other side of the coin. Like it's the age of information and also the age of misinformation. But there are lots of great sources of information that you can get from. And so you just have to be discerning in how you're selecting the feed that you're engaging with. The problem is that even people who are extremely intelligent, repetition increases how much people believe things.
Sure.
And that is equally true for people who are smart and people who are more intuitive. And so the way that you curate your online experience is extremely important.
So, I mean, is it fair to say that misinformation spreads because people don't slow down, or is there something more kind of malicious in the world that we live in?
It could be both things. I think it's the reason it spreads is because of underlying psychology, because the spread is the malicious part is the people who are making it, right? They're like people who are deliberately trying to inject bad information into our information ecosystem, but then it doesn't. They don't have the tools to spread it. There's bots and stuff to try to amplify it, but it's basically up to people to figure that out, and it's the people who spread it. So it's both things at once.
So I imagine that mainstream media and organizations like PolitiFact are huge fans of your work, because in some ways you legitimize what they do, right? I mean, or you call attention to how fact-based, some demonstrably fact-based, hierarchical, traditional news entities maybe, because there's more traceability, I guess, with the information. So how do we kind of explain the kind of epic like free fall that mainstream media is in, and the rise of deep fakes, and our own president putting out fake videos, and like how does that work?
Well, I mean, there's different elements of that. Like some of it is, like I said, there's the top-down part. There are explicit cases of, you might say political elites is one of the terms that's often used in political science to refer to the people who are kind of like trying to generate the ideas and the narratives that will influence people. And there has been basically, in my own view, a lack of regard for the truth. This, I think, in a certain sense, we have like a...
By whom? By
political
rank
elites.
And file? Okay,
yeah,
by
exactly.
political elites.
In particular.
But that's always been the case, right? I mean, I just watched the Garfield documentary, and it was show, and it was all about spreading misinformation.
But they didn't have the tools that we have now.
So it was the megaphone problem.
Exactly. So then we have online influencers who have gigantic followings who don't have really any constraints on what they say in terms of like
the Joe Rogan kind of that, like that's not a journalist, that's a something else.
Yeah. And I think the key thing that I often tell people is that journalists make mistakes, and there's of course a wide range of what counts as legitimate versus illegitimate journalism, yellow journalism, all that kind of stuff.
Probably it's a continuum,
spectrum,
and
But people at reputable places, if they were to make something up, they could get fired for that. I mean, they would be fired for that. It would be a giant scandal.
A correction is you get called to the carpet, and you have to fill out forms and mea culpa, and
exactly. And the actual like journalistic outlets have a brand around trustability, whereas if you're a social media influencer just making YouTube videos, in fact, if anything, you're incentivized to make things up because you get more clicks that way. There's no other additional constraint saying on whether you tell the truth or not.
Is there a problem in terms of mainstream media that you have the newsrooms divided by the news side and the opinion side, and that those are blurry now? And we've seen the rise of the opinion side, and for New York Times, Wall Street Journal, et cetera, Washington Post, you're seeing the creep of all the opinions on the above the fold, and we used to say, and is that problematic in terms of normal people parsing the news?
Yeah, people don't know the difference between them, and it's a gigantic difference. His opinion is not news, and so you're allowed to it's an opinion. You can say what you want, and doesn't have to be fact-based necessarily or anything. And so and there's, they have some editorial, at good outlets, they have some editorial kind of like guide on what should be published as an opinion piece, but it's not the same as the news. And that's, part of the other problem is that the thing that led to that, where most of what people think of as news is actually opinion, is 24-hour news stations. There's not enough news to fill 24 hours, and so what it is punditry, and so it's opinion. You only have, within an hour block of time, you have maybe 10 minutes of news.
So it's a paucity of real news. It gets filled in with. All right, well, so I guess, can things like AI help, or is it going to hinder, or what's your take on antidotes to some of this, or at least like pushing back against it?
Right, so that is, people are concerned about AI, and I think that's totally legitimate. One of the things that we've done is we've tried to use it to improve things. So one thing that AI is good at is forming good, coherent arguments using lots of evidence and facts. And so we want to test this underlying idea. So what I was talking about before was that people rely too much on their intuitions, and that like kind of leads them astray. But another version of that is if people aren't stopping and thinking, then they're not really evaluating evidence. But if you're able to give people a huge amount of like really high quality evidence that specifically addresses their like idiosyncratic beliefs, then it's possible that you might actually change their mind. And so that's what we were doing in these experiments, where we had people who were down the conspiratorial kind of rabbit hole, talking with an artificial intelligence, and they knew that they were in like a, just like not literally talking, but like having a computer conversation with it. And what we had the AI do was give them specific counter evidence that addressed the unique beliefs of the person. So the person might think 9/11 is an inside job. They would give some reasons for that. Then the AI would just debunk all their reasons. They would respond. AI would debunk those back and forth a few times. And after about 8 minutes of conversation, we found like a quarter of the people who believed a conspiracy didn't believe it anymore after this.
Wow, that's really impressive.
So it's a lot.
But what about AI's kind of agreeability factor, where it's
in this case, we're telling the AI to debunk.
Push back.
So you can go to debunkbot.com. That's the website we use. And that AI is now being specifically told to challenge people about their beliefs.
Does this mean that AI could be taught to do that more generally, and that it's
yeah. Oh yeah, that's just it's just prompting.
Going
it's just
for engagement rather than veracity.
Yeah, exactly.
So how about the just we have this sense that AI is only as good as the information it scrapes. How do we winnow what it's scraping so that we can be more confident in the truthfulness?
Well, in this case, because they're trained on the internet. One thing the internet is good at is conspiracies. So when we had fact checkers evaluate the quality of the evidence that the AI was using, and it was actually nearly perfect in this case. This is a scenario where there's a lot of things written about most conspiracies, and so it's able to do that in terms of search. Now we also had a case where we did it following the first Trump assassination attempt. There was a bunch of conspiracies that were just immediately after it were as is often the case, were just kind of growing. And then we did that same experiment. In this case, the AI didn't have any information about what actually happened or anything, but it was still effective because it basically argued to people that they didn't have information either, which was true, and it was able to kind of increase people's skepticism, and they were more uncertain about whether the conspiracies that they had come up with or they were just hearing were true.
So you're saying increasing people's skepticism is a way to push back against kind of digesting without necessarily, pushing,
In an engaging way with good arguments.
Yeah.
It's possible to really convince people to change their minds. And I think this is counterintuitive for people because, if you say maybe you have a relative at Thanksgiving or something, and a
lot of us are thinking about a couple weeks from now and what might happen, sure.
And then you have a conversation where, they believe something that seems pretty dubious to you. And then you try to tell them why they're wrong, and they don't believe you. One of the reasons why that doesn't work is because maybe your arguments aren't very good. And it is still the case in our experiments. Not everyone changes their mind. It's not like you can just flip a switch and change someone's mind. But if you think about it, all of the information that sent them down the rabbit hole, in theory, you need almost as much and maybe just a little bit more to get them back out. And so one conversation is rarely enough to kind of convince someone to basically deconvert. But in this case, using AI, we can get so much information that it actually pulls them pretty far out of the rabbit hole.
Wow. All right. So if we're going to bring it back to our theme, kind of research that fixes real world problems, what does that look like for your work? And how can studying human stupidity actually make the world smarter?
Right. So, some of it is like that, like the power of facts and evidence, but also there are more simple things too. And so going back to the social media context, that is a case where people essentially are kind of inattentive. And one thing that we found is that when people share misinformation online, they often don't even consider whether it was true or false before they share it. Like they're not thinking about it because
they're sharing entertainment, or they're sharing
because it's
saying hi.
It seems, or it seems important. Like if it's news, it might be that you share it because it's like, oh my God, this is crazy. Like people need to know this, and it didn't occur to them to say, wait, is it true? And so we've done these experiments. In fact, what we find actually is people share more false things than they would believe if we asked them directly about whether it's true. So there are cases where people are sharing things that they would be able to identify as being false if they thought about it. So what we do is we just have these simple, like it's called accuracy prompt or accuracy nudge. It's just a reminder to think about the truth, to think about whether things are
What does
accurate.
that look like? So it just pops up on their screen?
Yeah, it could be like an advertisement. We've done ads. It could be like, it's called interstitial, just kind of pops up.
Sure.
Be like, or...
So what does it say exactly?
It could say any number of different things. It just has to be a subtle reminder of whether something is true. I'll give you a more extreme example. We ran a field experiment on Twitter where we created a bunch of like cooking bots. So just like generic random bots. And we followed like many people with these bots. And then some people follow you back when you follow them on social media. And so the people who followed us back, that allowed us to send them a direct message. And so from a cooking bot, we sent them a DM slid into their DMs, as the kids would say,
Mm-hmm.
with a question, how accurate is this headline? And then everyone ignored it because it's a weird message to get from a cooking bot. But still, because we asked about accuracy, the first sentence was about accuracy, the quality of the news content they shared on Twitter in the 24 hours that followed was improved. More stuff from the New York Times, less stuff from Breitbart.
Yeah.
Just that little reminder is in their head now.
So we all need like someone poking us all the time.
Just a little prod. Remember, like if you care about the truth, right? And
maybe
everyone
we can
does.
build it into our smartwatches or whatever.
Yeah, and I think that's the core underlying idea is that like people do care about the truth, and they listen to facts and evidence. Just that they have to fight against all the other things that are diminishing those in our online environment in the current like context that we live in.
Wow. So is there any other advice that you have? I mean, it sounds like you're saying pause, take things a little slower, think slower.
Yeah, put the
what
truth
else?
first.
Yeah.
Stop and think. I mean, that's basically it. You basically summarized
God,
it.
you sound like my mom.
Yeah, exactly. I know. And none of it is like really groundbreaking stuff. It's just that in the context of the way people have been talking about the kind of like rise of political polarization, a lot of it has been under the guise of people kind of believe false things because they want to. And I don't think that's true. I think people are being misled and they want the truth. And if they had time to stop and think about it, they would probably be better.
So what are the next big questions that you're kind of asking in this realm?
Well, there's the version of our interventions that are scalable, where you just like simple reminders about the truth. That's easy to do. You can put that in ads. You can do stuff like that. Then there's the things that have large effects, which is like these conversations where people sit down and get like dense counter evidence for beliefs that are dubious. We want to try to get those together. What's the scalable version of people getting good facts and evidence in a personalized way? And we haven't cracked that nut yet, but we're working on it.
Ugh, yeah, I'll take that. I'll take two. Well, I think that's about all the time we have. And Dr. Gordon Pennycook, thanks for joining us and for giving us all hope that a little reflection can go a long way towards making the world less stupid. If you want to learn more about Dr. Pennycook's work, you can go to psychology.cornell.edu. And I am Laura Riley, and this is Research Matters, where Cornell researchers are working to fix real-world problems, one good idea at a time. Thanks,
Thanks, Laura.